Hello and welcome to the first series of videos for Senior Thesis Online Summit Christian Academy. Here we're going to begin looking at the nature, the essence of classical rhetoric, some of the history of it here in the first of our probably 3 videos here for history and background. And as we get a familiar grasp of where rhetoric came from and sort of the nature of a thesis, and give you a brief overview of some of the terms, the ideas, a little bit of a preview of what is in store for us here this semester and next semester writing the senior thesis, and get a good foundation in really where we are in the history of this topic and the history of ideas here, as we are still part of this classical world in a sense very much today. So let's begin here with a brief look at some history of classical rhetoric and a little bit of background for you. So here's what we're going to be covering here in this small series of slides and some of these videos here. Today we're going to look at this first one, introduction, what is rhetoric, and then in another video, the 3 kinds of rhetoric, and then wrap it up with, again, as we said, an overview of the course. You've gotten a little bit of a glimpse of that in the syllabus, and hopefully you're somewhat familiar with that by now. I know it's a very long document with the dual enrollment requirements from Thomas Nelson, but hopefully that you've been able to navigate some of those lengthy sections and focus on really the important things for us and what we need online and the requirements of this course. And then we're going to finish up with a brief sort of why study rhetoric other than, well, it's a required class, we need to take it to graduate and get out of high school, but there's a little bit more to it than just it's a required class. We really want to focus on why this class is really important, why it's so special, and why so many alumni have thought about this class as being a very helpful part of their intellectual growth, and not just their writing skills and research skills, but really your ability to think as a Christian. How do I help make this world a better place for other people and really do what God has called me to do here, and think biblically about pretty much every area of life here. And we want this course to be a helpful part of that for you as well. So a very important topic here in this class. It's not just a write a paper and defend it in sort of perhaps a somewhat scary prospect, but you've seen dozens of students do it throughout the years. You will be completely prepared to do it successfully by the time this course is over. And we really want to then spend some time here at the beginning to give you a good foundation for what it's about, why we're doing it, and how important and hopefully enjoyable it is. So a little bit of what is rhetoric. We're going to talk some definitions briefly, who uses it, and like I said, some history of rhetoric. And so let's begin. So really, I begin every year in this class asking the students, what do you think of when you hear the word rhetoric, right? And many of you have been in the rhetoric level of the summit for several years now, 2, 3 years, hopefully no more than 3 years, I guess, but that when you hear rhetoric, what do you think of? It's, for a classical school, it's that last stage of the trivium. It has different concepts and connotations for different people in the world today. Often seems very negative to a lot of people today, but hopefully for you, especially as you get closer to graduation, start to put some perspective on your learning experiences and becoming an adult and things like that, you can think of rhetoric in a more positive light as we go through this course here. So for some people it's positive, some people it's negative, really. And it's meant different things to different people over the years. For Aristotle, way back at the beginning of classical rhetoric, he says, as we've said, the counterpart of dialectic, that next stage in the trivium, observing in any given case the available means of persuasion. That's a key aspect of what we want to focus on with the rhetoric here, the means of persuasion, how you persuade other people to believe what you believe or get them to see things in a different way. Francis Bacon, a few centuries after Aristotle, says that rhetoric is the duty and office of it is to apply reason to imagination for the better moving of the will. And I'm a huge fan of Francis Bacon. He's sort of difficult to read sometimes, I know, but I love that expression, apply reason to imagination, that it's not just cold facts, but you're using your imagination and trying to win people over through exciting arguments and clever turns of phrases, things like that. A very creative process in being user of rhetoric. As he says, though, for not just personal gain or money or anything, but for the better moving of the will. There's a high responsibility here that, certainly as Christians, we understand that when we are trying to persuade people about things, especially, for example, like evangelism, that is a very noble and important, perhaps the most important thing that we can be doing. And we want to do that in an engaging sort of way. And there's certainly lots of Bible verses about how to persuade people with wisdom and humility and things like that. This is an exciting opportunity in this class to really hone those skills of trying to persuade people to believe the truth about God and reality, and to change the way people view life itself and who they are and their place in the world. This is a very exciting and important task that we're going to be setting out. As we'll see in the textbook that we'll be reading in the next several months, the author of that, Scott Kreider, says, in effect, that rhetoric is the art of soul moving. Gets right down to the heart of it there. The soul of it is we're going to change the way people view reality, move their souls to hopefully get closer to the way God sees reality and the way you see whatever particular issue that you focus on for your thesis. You're going to want to get people to think the way you're going to move their souls to be more in line with yours, which is pretty exciting. So, as we said, it's got a long history. And you've got a copy of this PDF that you can download from the website or from Canvas here. So I don't need to read all these slides to you out loud, but just want to highlight some of the important things that, as you said, it's finding the arguments suited to a given situation. You're composing the effective discourse. The goal, as we said, is not necessarily persuasion. The goal is finding the means of persuasion. Right? A great example would be Jesus. We wouldn't say that necessarily Jesus always persuaded his audience, right? But we wouldn't think of Jesus as a poor speaker, a poor user of rhetoric. He did what he needed to do. He found the means to persuade them. He said the right thing in the right ways, and it was the audience's responsibility to respond the right way. So you will not be judged on whether or not you necessarily get the judges and the people in the audience in your thesis defense to believe what you believe, but you'll be assessed on, did you do your part in finding the means of persuasion? And that is really what rhetoric is about. Did you make it available for the audience to believe what you should have them believe and what is true about it, right? We use it because we need to judge the opinions of people. We need it because people disagree. People see every issue, even the ones that seem obvious to us. There will always be people out there that disagree, right? And one of my favorite mystery characters from the author Rex Stout in the Nero Wolfe American Mysteries, really enjoyable series, says in one of the later books, we all take chances when we exchange words with other human beings. And that is certainly the case, that sometimes whenever we talk to people, whether it's persuasion or just conversation, it's always a risk when you're talking with other people. And so we want to hone those skills to do it in a good way. So all that to boil down to, so when we say what is rhetoric, your good definition for rhetoric is the art of finding the available means of persuasion. Good thing for you to memorize there, a good definition of rhetoric, the art of finding the available means of persuasion. Okay. So you are, and you have been, whether you know it or not, a rhetor, people who use rhetoric to affect community thinking or events. We've all been rhetors. You've done it over the years. You've tried to persuade people to get you things, to do what you want them to do. Parents talking to children have different ways and levels of communication and trying to persuade them or convince them, hopefully not threaten them. When you're talking to your friends or when you're talking to your parents around Christmas time, like, it would be great if I had this thing for Christmas, or maybe, as I get ready to go to college, it would be great if I could have a new computer or a new whatever. Salespeople talking to consumers, they all have their own sort of style, language, manner of speaking to persuade, to influence people. So you've been involved in rhetoric for quite some time, whether you've known it as rhetoric or not. You are a rhetor. You have used rhetoric to affect the way people think, the way people view events, and we're going to do that certainly more effectively here. So a brief overview, for a long time in the classical world, speaking well was part of the health of society, of the health of public life. Did we have people in society that could talk well, understand situations, and affect politics, society? There was a moral implications to your ability to communicate well with others, right? And we spoke in the classical world to arouse the mind and emotions, to affect opinion. Still, that's very much with us even today, certainly. but certainly in that classical model of grammar to dialectic to rhetoric, it was building upon the essence of logic and things like that. And so over time, even before Socrates, there was in Aristotle, as we quoted earlier, there were the development of guidelines and a formula to a lot of these rhetoric aspects, and we still benefit from some of that today, and we will in this very course in the next few months. And how you choose your range, then ornament the discourse, the things you have to say, not just what to say, but when to say it, and stylistically how to say it. All very important. And so language was a key aspect of that for the classical world. And just the nature of logic and arguments, and we used a lot of things of commonplaces, examples, and we'll go over these in greater detail in the weeks and months ahead. Opinions were a matter of the community. There wasn't really such thing as my personal opinion so much in the classical world. Even today, when we think of things like my opinion, or I believe that's my opinion, if you really stop to think about it, you'd realize that you have that opinion because you've been influenced by other people. It's not even really your opinion. It's an opinion that you have taken from somebody else. You really like this band, you really like this food, or you like this, game or whatever, because other people made it. Other people liked it too, and they shared it with you and convinced you to enjoy it. And so it's not even your private personal opinion that you believe about this issue. And so opinions were a matter of community. We sort of forgotten about that a bit today, and we're very personalized and individualized in society, but it isn't really that way very much. So the classical world said we use language to teach, to move, to please people. The Renaissance came along. It's a long story we're trying to go over quickly here, but the faculty of the imagination regains prominence, as through what we call the Middle Ages. You spend a lot of time with that in history class. The forms of education and rhetoric sort of downplayed for quite some time, just because of the culture and society at large. Not a negative thing, of course, but the Renaissance sort of brings a lot of that back. Rebirth of formalist standards for quite some time. Then the Enlightenment sort of moves away from formal logic in a sense. Even though it's highly influenced by it, and the 19th century, the Victorian age in England, and 19th century, the age of colonialism and empiricism, basically puts an end to rhetoric, and not to say that they weren't very intelligent in the 19th century, of course, but it was all about straight communication of facts and almost more imperial might than persuading people with diplomacy and eloquent speech and things like that. So into today, the 20th century was a significant change, and again in the use of rhetoric, and even the 21st century with the digital age, very much so another sort of revolution in the way we communicate ideas, very much so, thanks to, and we are benefiting from some of that today with the digital revolution and being able to have online courses and videos from thousands of miles away. But we live in a world that thinks that the purpose of speaking is just to communicate facts, not so much persuade people. And you can see that in a lot of TV shows about courtroom dramas and things like that. And just the facts. Don't try to. We live in that sort of here's reality in this nice little box here, and anything out there is just personal opinion, and keep that away from us. Feelings and emotions and things like that. And we'll cover that as well. So, and that's a drastic difference from the classical world of believing that we speak to affect people's emotions, affect their soul, and to just communicate facts about an objective reality that may or may not be scientifically true. So a drastically different change in the way rhetoric and speaking has occurred over the centuries. And so it's hopefully you're starting to get excited about the fact that you are part of bringing us back as a culture and society to how things used to be, not just in the secular classical world, but for a long time, and valuing individuals and people, and as not just tools for power and things like that, but as people that need to know the truth about reality. And so here we are, as we said a few times already, focusing on that ability, that high calling that we have as Christians. And so that was a bit of a whirlwind there, a historical look at everything, but like I said, you take the time to go through the slideshow a little bit slower on your own if you want, and just sort of familiarize yourself with this territory. We'll see you again for the next video on the kinds of rhetoric.